Hi, it's it's me. It's Hamish here, and I want to talk about the Battersea Power Station geolocative app, which I did today. I got on the bus here uh, from East Putney. That's where I am, East Putney. I got on the bus and made my way down there, walked through the beautiful park, and downloaded the app. So, what is the Battersea Power Station Heritage Walk? What is it? It's a what I think is a first stage of a multiple stage development, and this app is taking us into this remarkable site on the edge of the River Thames as a heritage experience. So the Battersea Power Station is it's a real icon of the industrial era. And when London was struggling to produce power, they made this along with a number of other power stations to try to power the city. And it's really amazing when you walk across it. The smokestacks, the chimney stacks are just huge, and it's been decommissioned obviously for quite a long time, but they're redeveloping it. And all you see when you get near it are these just enormous smokestacks, and apparently they used to bring barges up just with volumes of coal, and I just dread to think how much CO2 this thing must have produced over the years. But apparently at one point in time it was literally producing about a third of London's entire power. But I've no idea how much pollution was kind of going into the atmosphere, and sulfur dioxide. It must have been terrible. Anyway, this heritage trail is a tribute to this, and it's a very different ball game than something like the Cartographer's Confession, which was really, I think, pushing new ground in terms of storytelling and its creative design and the way in which narrative and placemaking was going to really interesting and new places. Whereas I think this is a much more straightforward proposition, and I think for what it sets out to do, I think it really does do it. It delivers a good, robust overview of the power station and the site. And let's have a bit of a look at it. Let's have a talk about this, because um, this is just, I guess, a different genre, and I think when something carries the name of a heritage tour, a heritage app, then I guess the expectation is that there's going to be heritagey sorts of stuff there. And with something like this, I think it really takes a fairly straightforward approach on this genre. There's no fancy production. There's no actors' voices or transcripts which are read outside of primarily one narrator. While there's original music, it's fairly stock standard for me. It's fairly stock standard sort of music. It's not that beautiful, uh, you know, powerful original composition of something like the Cartographer's Confession, which I think really is a primary driver for the imagination and that storytelling experience. So I suppose this is storytelling which is happening for people who want the names and dates and the information. And it's I guess the fact that it's got the backdrop of these, the London skyline, and it's got these huge forest stacks. I'll just read you a little bit about what they say about the Battersea Power Station in the introduction from the app. Uh, it says the Battersea Power Station is being redeveloped to be back at the epicenter of the capital's commercial and cultural life. Its future looks set to eclipse even its own majestic past, and you are invited to be part of it. I mean, it's a bit sort of marketing and branding there. Now over 70 years old, Battersea Power Station has lost none of its power to astonish. It is remarkable only for its, not only for its scale, but also for the boldness of its design. Built in the 30s and designed by one of the great 20th century architects, it is one of London's most loved and recognised landmarks. In 2013, the architectural practice Wilkinson Eyre was appointed to carry out refurbishment of this iconic masterpiece. The proposed designs are consistent with and sympathetic to Sir Giles Gilbert Scott's original vision, with the chimneys and turbine halls remaining dominant features of the building. So there's lots of history, there's lots of connections with the City of London, and this one of the stories that I loved was that the fighter pilots during the Second World War would often get their bearings either when they were returning back to London, if they were coming from Germany, the English fighter pilots, or apparently the German pilots would also get their bearings because, of course, it was emitting steam. So this great big huge belching machine was not only ingesting huge quantities of water from the Thames River, which became peppered with sulfur dioxide, but it was also emitting just huge amounts of carbon. And when you see the sheer volume of coal that needed to feed this hungry beast, it's a frightening thought. So what's this like as an experience? Well, I thought it was pretty tight. I thought that for what it's setting out to do, it was delivering. It's interesting that the app is broken down as in three parts. When you download it, you initially get a narrator who sort of comes in before you start, and it gives you an overview of the app. And then the architecture of the app itself is broken down into the heritage trail. And they're making quite a lot of this thing called the director's door experience. And this is a piece of augmented reality, which is where you come across a door during your travels, and a little thing pops up on your screen and it says scan the door, and then you'll be able to do a virtual reality experience. And I think it's a little bit dated for me in that we all know the soul of the whole project, which was the sumptuous sort of deco looking room that was the sort of the mothership of the whole um, mad experiment. And then the third section of it is just a sort of a, what is it? That's right. It's a kind of like a kids. It's a kids section which allows kids to do some question and answers, and there's a kind of a like a treasure hunt sort of thing, or some game things, which are fine. I suppose the kids probably, it's a great way to allow the adults to be able to do their thing and the kids to do theirs. So that's how it's largely kind of framed. For me, I think one of the things that I found was because the site's largely in the first stage of redevelopment, and there's huge building going on, not only with the old uh, Battersea Power Station, which will be an extraordinary place if they put apartments in there to live in. It'll just be amazing. Around the broader area, I found the development pretty ordinary, and I did find that I didn't really have that sense of curiosity that I had with, say, the Cartographer's Confession, where you're in this amazingly old part of London, and it's all happening in and around the story that you're slowly kind of uncovering. It felt very much like a construction site with a very uh, limited uh, uh, paths for me to go down to explore things. I was unable to find where some of the final stories were, and so I pressed them manually, whereas the other ones came up via GPS. It's a uh, for the app developers. It's a difficult, must have been a difficult site with GPS because there's this huge, ominous series of buildings and you're walking down through the middle of that. So I imagine that must have made it quite interesting to do. The story of the Battersea power station itself, I thought was really interesting. The narration was fine. I wished there could have been a little bit more of, some, I suppose, some richness around the sound composition and the way in which the stories were delivered. But again, I don't think a lot of people necessarily are looking for that. I think they'll probably find this a pretty good proposition in terms of informing them about what's going on. So every time you stepped into a story, you got a really quite a lovely design coming up with the Battersea Power Station Heritage Walk, and you could flick across some pretty cool images. So I think the whole design experience was really nice. It was pretty tight too. There wasn't really a lot of opportunity to kind of make the system go into a bit of a muddle. I noticed that if you did flick back from a story that was playing back to see where you were, the story would stop, and then I'd have to go back and restart the app again to get into that story. This whole thing, I suppose, of resetting stories and not resetting them is kind of an interesting debate, I suppose people have, and we certainly have it with Sound Trails, that if someone has finished the story, do you then cancel that out so that if they walk back into that, it doesn't play again? And with GPS being a jumpy kind of creature, sometimes it can be a bit of a hassle. And it also depends, I suppose, how close your stories are together. In this case, with the Battersea Power Station, the stories were pretty nicely spread out. But again, for me, it wasn't really so much an experience of discovery. It wasn't really something that fed my imagination a lot. It was a relay of information. It wasn't heavy with facts and figures, but it certainly was something for the history sort of aficionados, the people who want to to know the gist of what's going on. And I think it's a very user friendly platform. It's pretty straightforward with great layout, great design. A couple of things which um, a couple of things which I think, well, one thing in particular which I think is for me a little bit problematic, but again, it's really understandable, is it would appear to me that the developers and the app are working quite closely together. And being a stage one of a huge multi-stage project, they're obviously wanting to promote this heritage trail by way of some sort of community building project, or to attest to the importance of the history for the site, because it really is going to be the land of the rich and famous, or it's the nouveau riche, or people who can afford to buy apartments on the banks of the Thames River, which I imagine are people who are out of my wage bracket, that's for sure. So that sense that it had branding and that the developers were somehow in here, I did have a bit of a feeling that they were sort of looking over my shoulder the whole time, and very much so selling the brand and selling the marketing design. And one story in particular, I can't remember whether it was story 8 or story 9, was the future of Battersea. And I was a bit shocked at first, actually, because up until that stage, it had really been a range of audio stories with pretty cool images that came up, and then you were able to stop and sort of see bits and pieces of information in the tactile environment around you. And meanwhile, you've got this remarkable, huge, great big um, uh, monument there just behind you. But I think it was story 8 or story 9, which was the future of the power station, and it was pure marketing schmick. And I found myself a bit turned off by that. It went to audio visual, and it had this sort of snazzy marketing music. And I just sort of thought, nah, this is not so much about the experience. It's not so much about storytelling. This is a pure piece of PR here. So a bit of a thumbs down from me on that count. The transcripts, they had transcripts with the stories, and I thought that was really nice. Actually, they worked really well. The interface with the stories and the transcript worked nicely, so you could actually read while the narrator was talking. And I thought that was for on a number of counts, I thought that was really useful for what they're doing. So yeah, look, I think this is a pretty straightforward proposition. I think it's delivering on what they're setting out to do. I think it's a fairly well designed architecture, and I have no problems. Am I meant to be critiquing this? No, I'm not meant to be. I'm meant to be reflecting on this. That's what I'm saying. So yeah. Onwards and upwards. Thanks so much.